Hi there, I'm Birgit O'Connor, and welcome to the World of Watercolor Painting podcast. Now, today we've got a very special guest, Jane Blundell. And if you've ever wondered about light fastness, color blends, transparency, clean color, she's the one to talk to. She's from Australia, and her website is janeblundellart.com. I'll also post a link to her website and blog in the show notes. And recently, Daniel Smith came out with a small pan set of her colors that you can use for any kind of painting, along with her very special Jane's Gray. We'll be talking about different color combinations, fugitive color, and how you can create a really good shadow color that you can use on top of yellows. We'll be talking about Jane's process and the new book that she has available that I think you're really going to be interested in, along with a special discount offer for the month of April. So let's get started and have some fun. I'd like to welcome you, and I'm so excited to talk to you today. So, do you have any questions for me before we get started?
I've obviously recommended your books to many of my students. It's one of those things when whenever someone says, is there a really good book on watercolour? And I said, there are lots of books on watercolour, but if you want a textbook, this is the one to get.
Oh, thank you.
A lot of my students have bought that because it really covers what people need to know without bullshit.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, well, you know what? I am very, very direct and to the point, and yeah, I'm not very heady that way. So thank you so much. And it was such a nice surprise to see that in your collection. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed. Thank you so much. Well, you know, I told a lot of my students that I was going to be meeting with you today. They were like, please say hello to her, and all that hard work that you do on your blog and all that information that you give. It just, to me, that I just couldn't do it. You know, it's just overwhelming. And so you must have, I have so many questions for you. So. Oh, well, first of all, since I'm thinking about it, you must have such a love of color. How, I want to get into who you are and all this, but first of all, you are most known for your color, right? Or is that...
My nickname here is Colour Jane.
Oh, yeah.
The Colour Queen, or all sorts of crazy things. But yes, it's a real passion, and it has been as long as I can remember. So I just put on Instagram a post showing my 72 Derwents that I was given when I was 7. And that was, I was so excited. So back then, all this colour, and I used to all I ever wanted was art supplies and stationery supplies and coloured pens and pencils. And I loved colouring abstract things and creating things. And so it goes back as long as I can remember. When I was about 12, I remember doing a whole series of studies where I was actually exploring warm and cool and having things recede and advance and painting things in greens and blues and seeing how they compared with reds and oranges. And so I remember always being interested in the way colour worked and creating accents, so doing mostly green and blue and putting a little bit of red in it and seeing how it reacted. So all these sorts of things I was playing around with acrylics down in my little den, when I was 12. And it's interesting, I don't have much of my art from when I was a kid because the teachers always kept it. So, everything I did just got kept as examples and I never got it back. And I thought, so I don't really have anything before I was about 16. So, that was kind of an interesting one, that it's just, they all kept it.
That is interesting that they would keep it. That doesn't seem right at all. It's... you would think that your parents definitely would want that. So, oh my goodness. Well, let me start with, even though we have started, I'd just like to know, why don't you tell everybody what your website is so they can find you there, and we'll return to that at the end of the show too. And also your blog can be found on your website, right?
Yes, they are linked. So the website is www.janeblundellart.com, and there is a link to that. It just actually has blog as one of the headings, or the separate address for that is www.janeblundellart.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And people can follow it. So then, if every time I put something up there, it'll automatically go into their inbox. And I try and just put up things that I treat them quite differently. So the website is intended as a resource that you can return to, so it's predictable. So, you know, if you've found the watercolour mixing charts or you've found the swatches and you want to find them again, they don't disappear. Whereas the blog I treat as more of a whatever it is I'm looking at the time. And so one of the things I've aimed with my blog is to do a blog post on every professional watercolour brand in the world. And I'm very nearly there. A new one was released this year and I've got them up there. There are a couple I haven't got, but I'm working on. And there's a few that I've got a few missing. And then the other part of it is on my website. I then will have all of those swatches, and there's thousands of them now, all organised by pigment number. So all of the reds will be on one page, and they currently are, but I've got quite a few hundred to add. It takes a lot of time to actually scan every image and crop it and stick it up there, and I just have been working on a lot of things. But eventually and then I'm also doing a series of specific almost pigment spotlights. So, you know, a PBR7, which is a brown pigment, can have so many different personalities because it's raw umber and raw sienna and burnt umber and burnt sienna and all these other colours as well. And so just doing a blog post where they're all compared so people can actually see the differences. So I'm just fascinated with particularly watercolour, but colour generally. And I just find it interesting. And I think, well, if I'm interested, other people might be too. So, yeah, it goes back a while.
So do you have time to actually do painting of subjects? I've seen your website and that you have such a wide variety of things that you do. You know, you have done a children's book also.
The Magical Tree.
And that was written by Steve Stein, right?
Yeah,
and then you do etchings. You've done I mean, didn't you start with etchings perhaps?
I started with botanicals. So when I was a teenager, I did botanicals. I just loved flowers. And so I did very, very detailed studies of flowers as a child and detailed drawings and so on. I've always loved detail. And then I did etching at university because it was the most, I could already draw and paint. I wanted to do something where they were going to teach me something. And so I learned the craft of etching, and I learned it from a master who was very particular. And so all the prints are very clean, the edges are very neat, and all the things that people don't care about so much now. But when I was doing it, it was very important that every print in an edition was identical. And these days, everyone puts different colours over everything, and it's all one-offs and monotypes and so on. But I learnt it very traditionally. But it's not very child-friendly. So when I had young children, I didn't want sharp tools and acids and so on. And so that's when I really got into watercolour entirely because of young kids, watercolour and pencils and all the things that were non-toxic. So I haven't done much etching in a long time, but I really concentrate more on watercolour. Good question. I don't do a lot of paintings. I do a lot more sketches. I think I'm up to about my 60th, 69th sketchbook. I'm doing as many large paintings just because of the time I'm putting into other things at the moment. I do a lot of online teaching. I do a lot of travel and teaching. And so I've just had to accept that at the moment I've got other things I'm working on. I do a couple of paintings a year, and that's maybe 3, maybe 4. So not a lot, but it will come. Once I finish all these other projects that I'm working on, I'll get back to it.
It's hard to find the time to do everything. You know, it's just like I know that I've reduced my traveling schedule so I could turn my attention back to some other projects and do my own painting, because it's just challenging when you're traveling all the time. Do you do a lot of travel?
Yes. I've been traveling for at least 3 months a year. And so that's time away that I'm doing some teaching, some travel for fun, ski trips with my husband, all those sorts of things. But often they're teaching trips, so I'll go and teach for a week somewhere and then come back. And then I tend to go to the Urban Sketches Symposium each year. I've been teaching at those, and so I'll tie that in with as many other things as I can. I've had a couple of wonderful teaching trips in the US, having something like 15 workshop days teaching in 21 days and driving in between. And one day I think I had 16 hours to drive 1,600 miles, that's what it was. It's just, you just finish one and right, off we go. And so, yeah, I'm not going to want to do that forever. But
are you coming back to the US soon, or are you?
don't have a planned date at the moment, but there's a possibility of something coming up in July that would take me back.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't got it planned at the moment. But certainly, yes. It's just a case of when.
You mentioned before how a lot of people are just changing the watercolor medium and they're using all different things. Like to me, watercolor is watercolor. It's not really water in acrylics and all that. I hate to say that, but that's kind of what it's not a water medium. I think of it as watercolor. How do you feel about it?
Well, I agree. One of the interesting ones that changes the boundaries a little bit is the core watercolors, the QOR,
Yeah.
because they came out with their own aquazole medium instead of gum arabic. And I had heard very good things about gold and acrylics. They've always had the reputation of being fantastic. So I was really excited to try these. I thought they'd be wonderful. And while they do have less drying shift than other watercolors, so they really do hold their color, they felt, to me, quite horrible because they didn't feel like watercolor.
Really? That's fascinating to me because I was really curious. I just thought they were, I barely even looked at them. Actually, I haven't had the chance to do that, or I'm really set in what I like. So I was wondering, I thought maybe they'd be too bright. So they don't react like regular watercolor?
No, they don't behave the same. The closest thing I could think was it felt as though I was painting with alcohol instead of water. There was something less liquid. There was something different about it, and they didn't granulate the same. And they if you put them into a pan and then let them dry, they didn't re-wet particularly well. So I mean, I've always thought if someone was transitioning from acrylic to watercolor, they might enjoy them because they felt more acrylic, they felt more artificial. There are people who love them and they do love the brightness. I mean, I think some people find it difficult, the drying shift that we adjust to with watercolor. So I think there's a market for them, and they do have some excellent pigments and so on. But I didn't enjoy them. They're not something that I loved. And I always try and say what I'm looking for is watercolors that, when you put them in a palette, as I tend to do, and let them dry, they will re-wet and reactivate. If they don't do that, I'm not interested. Because I tend to do so much travel sketching that I take the colours with me, and I don't want to be putting them out of straight from tubes. So I don't tend to use M. Graham, even though they're a wonderful brand, because they don't work for what I do.
That's interesting. I'd like to interrupt you for a second because you don't use M. Graham. I thought with their honey base in there that they would re-wet well. I don't use that. I use a lot of Winsor & Newton. So
They re-wet well, but they don't dry.
Oh,
Particularly
okay.
in instances where it's very humid.
Right.
So I've tried them and I've made up little half pans, and they just seem to get wetter and wetter because the honey absorbs moisture from the atmosphere, and then they start growing mold. So for my climate, they really don't work. And I've had someone sent me a whole bunch of little samples. I think it was just a little chewing gum packet with little samples of watercolour in each one, and each one grew a different colour of mould. So for this climate, the M. Grahams don't work so well. But I think in the dry climates and in a lot of the US where there's more air conditioning and basically drying out the air, they're probably absolutely fine. And certainly people who work with watercolour straight from the tube, they're fabulous. But for me, they just don't work.
I also thought with the honey in there, that's supposed to prevent the molding.
It's supposed to. But I think our mould might like American honey. I don't know. It didn't work.
Well, that is fascinating. And so I also heard that Sennelier has honey in there, right? So then what do you think about them?
Same problem. So they will also not completely dry. And so once again, beautiful to use if you use them straight from the tube. And there are plenty of artists who do that. I think you do, don't you? You tend to work with the paint often straight from the tube.
I prefer for the movement, for the size flower that I'm working on, or for if I'm working on a large sky to get the richest color intensity, I like to use it, squirt new color into my wells, but I will add to the existing color and then use that.
That's what I thought from watching your videos.
As I repeat myself over and over again. Oh my goodness. So, and also, since we're talking about your travel sketch, doesn't your travel sketching, Daniel Smith, did they come out with a whole set for you, or didn't they do that?
Yes, they did. I should be able to just grab one and show you.
That's okay. I'm like you too. I'd be running around the studio. I've got everything just out there.
What have I done with them?
That's nice to know that I'm not alone. Well, I'm so happy that I have a chance to actually. I mean, I am honored. I saw that you liked one of my paintings on, I think it was Facebook, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm so honored. And then when you contacted me, it was like, oh my gosh, I've just got to ask you if you'd like to do it. And this way, I'd love to. That's the wonderful thing about what we do is when we connect with other artists, that have that passion that like we do. So, okay, show me your set. Let's take a look. I'm going to wait. Hold on. Let me get this on here. Okay, go ahead.
So it's a set. Many years ago, I created what I called the ultimate mixing set, because it was designed to be able to be a small number of paints. So there's 15. It was designed to be at the time all single pigments except one, which was the mix, which I called Jane's Grey. But you can mix anything with it. And my theory is if you can do whatever you want to do with just mixing 2 colours, that is so much easier than if you need to always mix 3 colours, because I find my students always struggle with 3 colour mixes. And so it had enough pigments that you could then mix a huge range of greens and purples and all sorts of things, and darks and so on. So then I've been asking Daniel Smith for a long time to create pans of colour, just because buying tubes, setting things up, putting them in the palettes is hard for beginners. And I'd much rather beginners start with artist quality than student quality. And eventually they said they would, and we sort of discussed different ideas. They were talking about, 6 colours, 12 colours, 28 colours, all sorts of things. And then they actually said, well, what would you want to do? And I said, well, if you're going to do one for me, you'd do the 15. And they did. And they did it in a box that holds just the 15. So I was stunned. So that's what it looks like. And it's the 15 colours that I've recommended, including the Jane's Grey. So they've mixed up that.
So do you have a white in there too?
It's not a white. No, it's buff titanium. It's an absolutely gorgeous colour. I'm going to show you a swatch of it so that it's just a sec. Easier to see.
I like that we're both wearing green today. And while you're looking for that, I have to tell you, somebody mentioned about your Jane's Grey, and a lot of my students have called what I do too is like a beer gets they call it beer gets blue or beer gets gray, whatever they call it, but it's really I use the French ultramarine blue and burnt sienna from Winsor and Newton, and you are using, I believe, isn't that the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna?
Yeah, but the Daniel Smith, so it's a different
Right.
burnt sienna.
It's completely different.
I have all these swatches. Okay, so that's all. That's every watercolour in the world, basically, all painted out.
I'm looking at it. I think that we need to turn this into a video podcast for everybody to see. They're going to have a slight lag, but that's too bad. Okay, go ahead. Show me.
Right. So if I bring this right in, you can see
Oh my
that
goodness.
the buff titanium is not white. It's granulating. It's a white pigment. I think of it as an unbleached white. So if you had an unbleached calico or an unbleached linen, it has this ecru colour and a lot of granulation. And I live in Sydney, which is a city built on sandstone. And the sandstone can be depicted with the buff titanium and a lovely colour called goethite, which is a bit like a yellow ochre, and another one that's a transparent red oxide. And those 3 together will create the colours of Sydney sandstone. But it's also lovely for marble. It's lovely for concrete, added in with other colours and so on. So I find it incredibly useful. And it also acts as a sort of it'll create pastel colours. I don't tend to use a regular white. This one's a PW6:1, which is a titanium, unbleached titanium. But this one I use all the time. So, yeah,
Really?
so that's buff titanium. Yeah.
So now
That's not a bad many.
well, your set, I would assume those would be all your favorite colors, right?
Well, the interesting thing is the set is designed for anyone who wants to get into watercolour and work with it with ease. what I have in my palette has a couple of quirky differences. So this is actually very much designed for people to work with. So yes, this has a lot of my favourite colours, but it has a couple of colours that I recommend rather than use, which sounds a bit strange, I know.
No,
I do explain this
not
on
to
my blog.
me. Doesn't sound strange to me.
For example, there's a fabulous red in here. It's a really beautiful warm red called Pyrrol Scarlet.
I love that color.
It's one of the most beautiful reds I think there is, because it's a classic warm red. It's relatively transparent and it's really rich. But in my own palette, I use a different red. I use one called Transparent Pyrrol Orange. But I think if I put Transparent Pyrrol Orange into a palette and it's an orange, it confuses people. So this one will mix beautifully and do all sorts of other things, but it's not the one I use. And the same with the Phthalo Blue. There's a Phthalo Blue green shade, which is the more traditional green, one to use, and it mixes very well. It creates all sorts of extraordinary colours. And in fact, these two mix together to make the most beautiful Prussian blues and indigos and all those sorts of things. But in my palette, I have red shade, just because in Australia, our sky can sometimes be Phthalo Blue red shade, and I just prefer it. But if I wanted to make it into a green shade, I know to add a bit of phthalo green, and away I go. So what I use personally and what I recommend, they just have those two differences. But otherwise, yes, all of these intermix beautifully. I only use these two yellows. They'll do anything I want to do.
What yellow do you use?
It's Hansa Yellow Medium, which is
I love that. I use the same one.
97, yep. And I use the genuine quinacridone gold, which I bought up. I have plenty of those. So I still use the PO49. But the hue is pretty good. So then there's three reds, which is different. Often they talk about a warm and a cool red, but it has a warm red, so the Pyrrol Scarlet, and then the Pyrrol Crimson, although in the set they were having trouble, so they've used permanent alizarin crimson, which is the same hue, just it's a mixture, which gives the crimson red, which will mix blacks with the phthalo green. So some of them are in there because of what else they'll do. Lovely for flowers and so on. So that gives that really rich crimson. Mm-hmm. And then the quinacridone rose, which, such a basic, it's permanent rose in Winsor & Newton. And then ultramarine, so three blues as well, ultramarine and cerulean chromium. There isn't quite, it's closest to the Winsor & Newton cerulean blue shade, but it's not the same. Winsor & Newton's different. And then the phthalo blue green shade, phthalo green blue shade, which I would treat as a mixing green. It's one of those, as you know, you don't want to use it on its own. It just stands out and says, I'm an amateur, but it mixes.
Oh my God! Let me just kind of digest that one. That is too funny. That is so cute. I can totally. I get. Oh,
you get it. Yes.
Okay.
I'll say to my students, unless you are painting a person who's wearing a shirt in that colour, mix it with something.
Exactly.
But in this palette, it will mix bright greens with the Hansa Yellow. It'll mix gorgeous sap greens with the quinacridone gold. It'll mix blacks with the Pyrrol Crimson. It'll mix pine greens with the Indian Red. It'll mix beautiful deep greens with the burnt sienna. It just mixes beautifully. And then, of course, turquoises with the Phthalo Blue and the cerulean. So, once again, it's a mixing colour. Then it has the goethite, which is that lovely granulating colour that I really love.
Which one is that?
That's the goethite brown ochre. I'll show you what it looks like.
I haven't tried that one.
Oh, you'd love it. Well, I better get you one of these. I'd enjoy them. Hang on, I've just got to find him. It's also called brown ochre, so it's called goethite brown ochre, and it's really lovely. It's the granulation. And you're not so into the granulation with what you do, I suppose.
Well,
so it may not
depends on what I'm doing. I do love granulation. In fact, I'm just curious. My mind's going in different directions here. Like I do have this newer painting style. You saw that with the portraits that I've been playing around with, and having a little bit of granulation in there is fun, but also staying with the transparent colors. And yeah, the other thing I found when it comes to the Daniel Smith Primatech colors, it was a little challenging to kind of layer. Oh, go ahead, talk so I can see that.
That's all right. So that's the goethite. So it's very granulating. It's a PY43, so same as yellow ochre, but it's got a little bit more of a brown. The granulation is beautiful. So it does beaches and, yeah, just really lovely for that. So yes, sorry.
No, this is why I like the French ultramarine blue in the Winsor & Newton brand, because I like that granulation, especially with their burnt sienna. So, and then when it goes over to the Daniel Smith colors, I couldn't get that because it ended up going a little more towards a grayer side instead of a bluer side, which I wanted. So that I found that very fascinating that you liked that. And that was a gorgeous color that you just showed me. And why don't you repeat the name of that color again?
It's called goethite, and in brackets brown ochre. So it has that sort of full name. So goethite brown ochre, and I just love it because of the granulation. If you mix the buff titanium and the goethite onto damp paper, you have a beach without having to do anything else. It just creates all the nooks and crannies to create a beach. It's beautiful. So that's the other one. And then there's burnt sienna, the PBR7 as opposed to the Winsor & Newton PR101. Indian red, which I love because it's very opaque, but if you water it down, it gives you a very beautiful, soft earth red. And that combination of this one and the cerulean with a goethite is really interesting for portraits or just for doing, an earthy triad. And it's got raw umber, which is very different to the Winsor & Newton raw umber because it's very dark. Winsor & Newton's quite neutral, but this is really dark and cool. And then the Jane's Grey. So, there's nothing I haven't been able to create with them, which is why I call them the ultimate mixing set. And I did a book to go along with it to sort of explain, how they all work and how you can work with them and so on. So I was delighted when they brought it out because it is a really easy set to start working with. That was pretty cool.
Well, that's really exciting. I'm very happy for you. Because I use so much of the Winsor & Newton, and I still do love the Daniel Smith colors, but do you use other brands? I mean, obviously you've got so many different colors. So do you have a favorite or one that I hate to say that, especially when they've just did that little set. Is there one that you go to more often, a brand that you go to more often?
Well, I use Daniel Smith almost exclusively.
Okay.
I have done for 23 years.
Wow.
So I started with Winsor & Newton as a child, and then I went to Schminke when I was...
I love Schminke too.
In my 20s, I think I used Schminke. And then I lived in America for quite a few years. And when I know it was 23 years ago because my son's 23. When he was a baby, I first tried Daniel Smith, and then it came out 2 years before, so it was pretty new. And I bought a set, and it had, amongst others, it had quinacridone gold, which I just fell in love with. And it had the burnt sienna, and it had a lot of these colours that were so beautiful and rich, and I really loved them. And so then I just started using those. It was so much nicer than the other ones I'd been using, and I had little pans of Schminke, not the tube, so I could put them into different pots. And then I moved from America to Singapore, and so I started importing Daniel Smith into Singapore because it wasn't available. Then I moved to Australia, and I had to buy them again from America, and I talked to all these different shops, you need to stock Daniel Smith, they're really wonderful. And finally someone did, and they've done very well. But I think the thing is they have over 250 colours, so there's not many that they don't have. However, in Schminke, the colour that if you're using Schminke, you would have to have transparent orange. So in Schminke, that is their really beautiful, unique colour. If you're using Da Vinci, I think you'd have to have their Benzimida Orange Deep. It's another beautiful orange. I don't know if you've come across it, but it is absolutely gorgeous. Rich, perfect mid-orange with orange undertone, not yellow or red undertone. It's just a gorgeous colour.
Isn't Da Vinci a little more chalky in a way? It's not as transparent, right?
Da Vinci are beautiful paints.
Really? Okay.
They are really beautiful. And in the US, you can get the 37mm tubes, which are enormous. If you haven't seen them, it's worth seeing.
Yeah, and they're a great deal, aren't they? And they mix well together?
Yes. That's a standard Schminke tube, and that's the 37. I mean, Winsor & Newton have the big ones too. But I seem to recall that their Series 1 are only $12 in the US.
Yeah, they were great deals. Yeah.
No, they're very, very good. I tend to most highly recommend the Schminke, the Da Vinci, and the Daniel Smith because they work for me and what I'm doing. But certainly, you know, the oh, this is gouache, not watercolor, but it's the same size tube. But they are very, very good. There are lots of single pigment colors. Unlike some things like the Da Vinci sap green is a really lovely, use it as it is green. Sometimes they're really, really bright, but they do these with a phthalo green and a yellow ochre, and it's lovely. So no, Da Vinci are very, very good. They'll send out dot cards and things like that, and definitely worth a look. They have
Interesting.
nice granulation. A lot of their colours compare more with Daniel Smith than Winsor & Newton. So their raw umber is the deep dark one, like Daniel Smith, not like Winsor & Newton. Some of their naming is slightly different, but they're a very good brand. And the Schminky I really like because they come in largest tubes, large pans, small pans, so you can get whatever it is you want. And they have the same formulation for whatever it is. Whereas, I don't know if you know, but Winsor & Newton do different formulations. So their tube colour and their pan colour are actually formulated differently.
No, I did not know that.
Take a tube and fill up their pan.
Why would they do that?
Well, I think their theory is that if you're working with the tube colours, you're working with it wet. If you're working with the pan colours, you're working with it dry. And so if you try and fill up their pans with their tubes, it won't re-wet as well because it's intended to be used wet. So my Winsor & Newton students, I always have them just add a drop of gum arabic, not gum arabic, glycerin, and stir it in every time they put it into a pan so that it doesn't crack and so that it will re-wet better. So there's always a workaround.
Well, have you tried American Journey too? Because American Journey is made by Da Vinci, right?
Yes, it's not necessarily exactly the same formulation. They're very secretive about the formulation, so I don't know what's different. I've tried a couple. I haven't tried all of them. And there are colours that are available in the American Journey that are not available in the Da Vinci, which is interesting. But I'm going to. That's the next one that I'm working on. It's harder to get them in Australia, but I'm working to go through the whole range of American Journey.
I also saw that you were trying, you just wrote something, I think, on your blog. It was a different brand that I had never heard of before.
Roman Schmal?
Yes.
Yes. They're only released this year. So he's a guy in Poland, and he had given some samples to someone else to give to me, who we met up in Italy or something. And then we just kept in touch, and he said he'd send the range when they're available, which he did. And they are beautiful. They're only available as full pans at this point. I don't know if it's going to change. In some ways, I hope it doesn't, because sometimes it's simple to just have one thing available. They err on the slightly sticky side in terms of, some of them are, when you take off the wrapping, which I did a little YouTube video just to show unwrapping one because they're like little lollies, but they some of them are just a little bit wet. But basically the pigments are lovely. He has lots of natural earth colours, lots made with PR102. So really beautiful earthy range, and most of them paint out really well. Also some lovely mixed greens that are interesting, often 3 pigment ones, but really interesting ones. It's a very interesting range. I was very impressed. It's not often that you just, take something out of the box and go, ooh, this is fun. I really enjoyed working with them. And they're unbelievably cheap. And so, anyone in Europe, they're something like €2 or €3 for a full pan. You compare that full pan of something else. So I think if anyone wanted to get into watercolours, get in now, because I think they can only go up.
Can you say the name of that again?
Roman Schmal, SZMAL.
Okay, because that would be great for our European listeners if they want to get a hold of them.
Yes.
That would be
they're very good. So I've got the whole range on my blog, bar 2, which I need to just add. He sent me those to add, which I'll do very soon. And they really are beautiful.
Okay, I've got some questions from some of my students and listeners that I thought I'd like to see what you have to say about that before we run out of any time here. And so Mary Jemson would like to know, what is the most transparent color brand that you think? Do you think that's, you just add water, right? Or do you think single?
Yes, even if it's an opaque color, if you add enough water, it's going to be transparent. I think there are some brands that really claim to be really transparent. What comes to mind is Marie Blue was one that talked about being transparent. But I mean, really, the other way of looking at it is there's only maybe 2 or 3 that are actually opaque. So everything is transparent, semi-transparent, semi-opaque, or fully opaque. But of the fully opaque, the one that comes to mind is Indian red. You know, that is one that you can actually paint thick enough to cover a black line. Occasionally, a Chinese white might nearly cover it. Occasionally, a yellow ochre might cover it. But really, watercolour is not an opaque medium. And so there's a couple of blacks that might be, but there's not many. So then we get into the, I mean, there is a most transparent yellow or red or blue or whatever in most ranges. But the thing is, if you only go for transparency, you don't get granulation. You know, because the finer the pigment, the less they're going to granulate. And so I think I'm not so interested in just transparency. I'm interested in all the characteristics that you get with watercolour, because that's why it's such an amazing medium, because you can paint with all the characteristics of a pigment. In oil and acrylic, they're kind of hidden, but in watercolour, they're there to see.
Well, actually, you just made me think about, so when you said, because there's, about the transparency, because as I'm sure you've seen, when people start out, a lot of times their watercolors can be really wimpy, you know, not a lot of, so do you have any ideas or suggestions on that? Or sometimes they're too thick and pasty, you know, is trying to find that good watercolor blend. And why do you think a lot of people have colors that are too light?
I think a lot of people are a bit scared of medium because they're told over and over that you can't change mistakes. And I think that the more that they realise that understanding the pigment characteristics means you can choose ones that are going to be easier to work with and more easy to lift or to change if you need to, helps to overcome some of that fear. I think some people work with a brush that's too big for what they're doing, so it picks up more water than they can control. I think some people think that watercolour is wimpy. They think it's pale and washed out and don't realise how bold and dynamic. I mean, anyone working with you would know how bold and dynamic it can be. But I think that it had a bit of a reputation of being a bit washed out. And these days, the pigments that we have access to, it's as bold and bright and gorgeous as anything. But yeah, I think that understanding that water to pigment ratio takes a bit of time. I always like to think of it as a whole series of beverages. I actually will tend to do a demonstration where I'll start with a tube of watercolour and sort of show how that, you know, it's like toothpaste, and we don't paint with toothpaste. It is water and colour, so we always add water. But if you add enough, and if you actually sort of see it on a palette and see how it moves, and I've seen you do this, so you do the same thing. See how it moves, and I equate that thickest that you'd use with watercolour as cream, you know, pouring cream. So it will move on the palette in a fairly slow, but it will move. And then if we add, you know, a brush full of water, it will then move more like milk. So I think cream, then milk, and that milky one gives you your second tone. If we add more water again, it will then move in a liquid manner, you know, so it will like water. But I think of it as being like black coffee. If you had black coffee in a glass, you wouldn't see your hand through it, but it's completely liquid.
That's a good description.
Water again, we have tea. So you would start to see your hand in a glass, but it's completely liquid. And then the next one, that's a bit cheeky, but in America, if you were to ask for a cup of tea, you tend to get a cup of hot water and a tea bag on the side. And try as you might, you can't get much strength to it. So the last one is weak tea. So it's just lightly coloured water. But that actually seeing it moving on the palette, as I know you do, you can really start to judge so that you can predict that if it moves like this, it's going to paint like that, and so you can create your tones better. So I think that when people really explore how to create the tones and understand it and look at it and do it, then it gets easier to know what to aim for. And if they go too thick, then you get that ugly bronzing, and we don't want that.
Well, I like the way you described it, because when I ever think of the milk and cream and butter and tea and coffee, I'm thinking, I don't know, I just don't think that way, but you explained it beautifully. The other thing is that somebody was asking me now, since quinacridone gold is not going to be available, what do you prefer? How can you guide people on what to choose? Well,
I think that of the hues, I think the Daniel Smith one is is pretty close. It shows through a bit more yellow than the quinacridone gold did, but it does mix in a very, very similar manner. So I think that one's a good option. The other one that's very good is the Schminky hue. That one is a very close as well. And the other one is this new Roman Schmal. It's a very nice version as well. The Winsor & Newton one has always been much more dull. If you're using Winsor & Newton, you can make a beautiful quinacridone gold hue using their transparent yellow and their burnt sienna. It's perfect, makes a perfect match. But they put in some quinacridone violet for some reason, and it does make it quite dull. So I wouldn't recommend the Winsor & Newton one if you're trying to match that original quinacridone gold colour. I mean, as I said, I bought up a lot. I knew it was going to happen, and I just bought up plenty of tubes. So I'll be using the original quinacridone.
Is it not available at all anymore?
No. Unless you happen to go into a dusty old store that hasn't had a lot of business, then you might find it.
Okay.
But basically, it's no longer available. There is a version available through a pigment company in New York, but it's not at all the same. It's called quinacridone gold and it's called PO49, but it isn't the same colour. It's much more rusty gold. It's not the same.
Well, since we're talking about yellows too, or the golds, I'm just curious, like when you have a yellow flower or an orange flower, I'll stay pretty much more to yellow. What would be a good shadow color for that?
Yeah. So it's actually the shadow on the flower or in the background?
On the flower, on the petals.
Yeah, on the petals. So I tend to think in the opposites. So if you have a yellow, then you want to add purple to create shadow colour. And so because I don't generally have purple in the palette, I will mix it with either quinacridone rose and phthalo blue or quinacridone rose. Well, generally with phthalo blue, because on a shadow you don't necessarily want granulation on a flower. So I wouldn't necessarily use ultramarine or cerulean. I might use indanthrone blue because that also doesn't granulate, or I might use one of the phthalo blues. But so I'd make the appropriate purple to then mix a tiny bit of that with the yellow I started with, and that will give a fairly natural shadow colour.
I like that. I didn't even think about the indanthrone blue. I have it, but I just never use it. But I know it's beautiful.
Yeah. The other option is I just use Jane's Grey because it actually adds a neutral tint. If you use it just a little bit, washed out, you'll still see the colour through it, and it will actually behave as a neutral tint. So I quite often do that.
So that to me seems like it would be a really good option because like I said, with the combination that I go with the Winsor & Newton, it has more of a blue, but if you went with the Jane's Grey on top of a yellow and then had it thinned out a little bit, because that is a more maybe neutral color, that would probably be a really good shadow on top of a yellow.
It works in a simple manner, and it's lovely shadow for paper, so it's lovely for anything with white flowers and so on. You can just paint entirely in that, but it does work. I mean, it's slightly on the blue side of a shadow color.
I like that. I'm gonna have to try that. I think that'd be good because like when so how is the Jane's Grey different than a neutral tint?
Okay, neutral tint is made always with black, and usually phthalo blue, and sometimes something else, with one exception. So M. Graham make a neutral tint where they use a green and a red. So there's no black in it. This is the only one. All the other neutral tints have black in it. And as soon as you have black in watercolour, you've got a colour that is absorbing all your light and not reflecting it. And so that creates a dullness. Jane's Grey, because it doesn't have black, it's ultramarine and burnt sienna, it doesn't have, even though it goes quite dark, it still is going to be reflecting the light. And so it doesn't create a deadness. Unless if you use it too thick, anything can. But it's, as soon as you wash it down, it'll create a grey that's not dead.
Well, I'm going to have to try that because like in one of my workshops, we were working with a neutral tint because I don't usually use neutral tints, and I thought, well, let's see what happens if we do this because I usually use the combination I have and it did dull it down. And I thought, it kind of makes it just takes it from that life into something that's way more subdued. So that was an amazing answer on that. I really appreciate that.
If I want to go darker, so Jane's Grey will go into a very dark grey, but it won't quite go black. So if I want to go darker again, then I use the combination of phthalo green and Pyrrol crimson. So in Winsor & Newton, that would be Winsor Red Deep and Winsor Green Blue shade. And that will mix a really, really rich, non-granulating and staining black hue. But once again, it's not going to have the deadness. So I call it Jane's Black, of course, makes sense. And so if I want to go even darker, that's what I use, and that will wash out to a beautiful grey. But it's a different one. So if you really want dark and you don't want to use black pigment, you can create it with that. Or I'll use the other combination of transparent Pyrrol Orange and Phthalo Blue Red shade, which also makes the most gorgeous black. But I just go a little bit on the blue side and it makes these beautiful deep blues. And I go a little bit on the brown side, it makes all these lovely burnt sienna colours. So it's a lovely neutralising pair as well.
Well, I'm also curious, you just triggered something, like how important is it to have warm and cool colors together in the same painting?
I nearly always do. I rarely would just use all warm. The only time I'd use all cool is if I was going with a really classic CYMK palette. You know, if I wanted a sort of a lemon yellow and a quinacridone rose and a phthalo blue. You can mix anything with it. They're all cool. But generally, I'm mixing warm and cool all the time because I would tend to use, I'll tend to often use the greens and blues. I just mix them up a lot. I think it's hard not to, really.
Exactly. But then if you mix a warm and cool color together in the same combination, it can get a little muddy, right? Or it gets a little duller?
No, not necessarily. I mean, for example, if I want a mid-red, I mix my cool red and my warm red and make a mid-red. I mean, yes, reds are all warm, but even within that, you're mixing a warm and a cool.
Right.
And on my palette, I don't have a mid-red, so that's the only way I can get it. But it's bright and gorgeous. If I want to make an orange, I mix my mid-yellow, which is my cooler yellow, and my cool red, which is quinacridone rose, and make a beautiful orange. So a lot of the time what you're mixing is a warm and a cool, and it makes a beautiful bright colour. So no, not necessarily. I think the problem where people get muddy colours is they just try and put too many in together, or if they're using cadmiums, because I think cadmiums create muddy colours very quickly because they don't like mixing with ultramarine and they can be a bit heavy. And so I think that's the biggest cause of creating muddy colours is using cadmiums. Much as they're beautiful pigments, they're not.
Yeah,
I think they've got to be used in moderation.
I stay away from this. So I've got a question from Liv Withrow. She said she just read your article about watercolor triads online. She read it online, and she'd like to know, what is your favorite triad?
The Earth Triad. I love working with, so this is in Daniel Smith, it's cerulean chromium, Indian red, and either goethite or yellow ochre. That's my absolute favourite.
And what do you... Yeah, go ahead.
It's lovely for urban sort of scenes. It's lovely for landscapes. It's very muted, and you want to water it down a little bit, but it just looks beautiful, and it captures actually the Southern California colours really, really well. As you go further north, it was funny, when I was driving up from Santa Barbara and driving up to Oregon, and the colours changed from that Earth Triad up into one I call the Aussie Triad, which is a crimson, Pyrrol crimson, ultramarine, and quinacridone gold. The colours got stronger, the greens got deeper, but in that more Southern Californian area, it was all this Earth Triad would have just been perfect. It's really lovely. It's very subtle, but very, very lovely. And you can't get every colour you want with it. And I would often add Jane's Grey or add burnt sienna or add, the buff titanium that I love. So I wouldn't necessarily only work with those three. But
well, it's wonderful. I like the idea. I really think I'm going to need to get some Jane's Grey myself. I know that. And let's see, Lisa Oliver had a question, and she'd like to know the best colors to use to achieve transparent lilac, coral, and salmon colors.
Okay, so quinacridone rose mixed with either a transparent yellow or the Hansa yellow medium. Either of those will do it. The coral colours, you kind of need the pink and then a slightly cooler yellow. And then if you want them to be a bit more pastel, you would add either white or buff titanium if you want to keep them strong. Obviously, otherwise just water. Salmon colours, the same thing. You can use the same combination. You can also get a lovely salmony colour with Indian red, watered down, and a touch of yellow as well, but it's going to be more earthy.
And then Barbara Dubowski has a question like, how do you get a bubblegum pink, sometimes called Barbie doll pink? I've never heard of that. Have you?
Yeah, once you get into the kind of unrealistic colours, that's where the opera rose, opera pink comes in, which I won't use.
Right.
So I would start with quinacridone rose, or even there's one that's even pinker, and that's quinacridone pink. For in Daniel Smith, it's a even pinker pink. You would probably add. I'm wondering if you'd actually add a hint of white or buff titanium to give it a little bit of a pastel kind of look, because that would give it a little bit more of an unnatural look. And for what was the other one? The violet?
Barbie doll pink.
Yeah, so Barbie pink, that's right. Start with quinacridone rose. And
have you ever heard of that name?
Yes, it's what all their little shoes and everything is. You know, the little hats, they're all really bright pink. But quinacridone rose with a bit of white or buff titanium would probably come pretty close. And she mentioned a lilac, was it?
There was the other one was Lisa Oliver wanted to know the transparent lilac, coral, and salmon colors, which you did. So
the lilac.
Yeah.
I'd use quinacridone rose probably with phthalo blue.
Yeah.
Tiny bit. You know, just very, very, very. I mean, it's such a powerful color, and then enough water to make it the strength that she's after.
And so you said that you wouldn't use opera. I personally wouldn't either, and I have my reasons. And so what are your reasons?
I have, when I was 16, I did a series of botanical studies using alizarin crimson, and they sat in my parents' house and faded. So I won't use anything that I know is going to fade. And I've done my own light fast tests on a number of different paints. And so if I failed my tests, or I've read that they're not likely to hold up to it, I just won't use them. Because it's not just that it's sometime in the future. If it's going to fade within half my lifetime, or even less, perhaps a third, it's not good enough. And it's very sad. I mean, they were really beautiful, detailed studies, and they are definitely washed out. So I did some really nasty light fast tests. I put them in a northern window, but not just in it, but outside it. So I really tested some colours, and they survived. You know, that was a pretty vicious thing to do in the Australian sun, which is incredibly powerful. So I just think if they're when you look at opera pink and what it does, it actually reflects its colour onto another page. You hold a piece of paper over it, it's reflecting onto it, and it's giving off all these fluoro colours, and they eventually are just going to go, and you'll be just left with usually the PR 122, which is its base. So yes, it's beautiful when you paint it on, if you want that sort of thing, but I just won't use it.
What about rose? I mean, like rose madder. I mean, that's a fugitive color also.
I don't use that either.
Yeah.
It smells like.
I know, it smells so good. Now, doesn't Daniel Smith make a quinacridone something that is close to their opera, but they use a quinacridone magenta in there?
They make an opera, which has the magenta, so it has the PR122, and then this fluoro it's called BV7, I think it is.
Would you use that one?
No.
Okay. That's good to know.
I don't use any of the fluoro ones. So Schminky have some very, very bright purples and pinks and things. I won't use those either. I don't use Areolin because it's also fugitive. I don't use... and even some of the Daniel Smith, some of their beautiful Primatex, some of those failed my light fast test. So I don't use them.
Didn't know that.
I mean, I use some of them, but only the ones that passed. So I just figure, you know, if someone's going to buy one of my paintings, I don't want it to fade on the walls. And even though, you know, we would hope that they're put in a sheltered spot and all those sorts of things. It's just, I just think we've got all these lovely light fast things available, so it's fine. I'll often say to people, look, if you love it, use it in a sketchbook. It's protected there. Or if you're going to have it scanned and so on. So it's not that I want them to be banned. It's not that I think they shouldn't be available, because it's actually nice to be able to see what rose madder looks like, or what alizarin crimson looks like, and what all the hype is about. I just don't choose to use it because I've seen what happens when you do.
You know how many people are resistant to hearing that. They do not want to hear that. And they get very upset with that. And do you work with gouache at all?
Yes, I do.
That's interesting.
So I have a gouache palette that I take out sketching with me. So once again, with gouache, I look for the ones, there's two types of gouache. There's the ones that have the chalk in it that are very opaque. And then there's the other ones that are really just very concentrated watercolour. And they're what I work with because they will re-wet. You know how normally with gouache, if you put it into a palette and then you go to reuse it again, you know, once you finish it, you just wash it away. Well, these ones, so it's the Schminke, the Da Vinci, and the M. Graham. Those can all be put into a pan and then they will re-wet. So that's what I've made up my palette with. I think I've put the whole palette on my blog, so show which ones I use. And I don't use it a lot, but there are times when I just feel like working on a coloured ground, or I want to paint over something, or just give a different look. So yes, I do use it. Sometimes I'll use white gouache just to add highlights, or throw a bit of a splash on. If I'm doing an ocean scene, I'll just use white gouache and splash it and that sort of thing, or add an outline. So yes, I do.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't expect that. So that's good to know. And so I know that we're just going to finish up here. I want to know, do you do different papers, or do you use Arches paper? What paper do you like to use?
I've used Arches traditionally for many, many years, but I don't know what it's like in the US, but in Australia, they reduced the number of sheets in a pad, and the price went up over a third. They basically kind of doubled in price, and it's become a little bit ridiculous. So
and the quality has been different too.
So I'm looking at options. I'm looking at Saunders. I'm looking at Fabriano. I have Fabriano in my sketchbooks, and it's beautiful. So having been a traditional Arches person and love them, they just work very, very well. I'm sort of looking at other options.
Same here.
So,
Same here. Do you like to use a specific type of brush when you paint? I mean, you do so much testing and you do your sketches, so you're not really working on full paintings very much. So do you have a particular brush that you like to use? And
I love natural hair brushes. So I've worked for a long time with Raphael. I really like their series 8404, I think it is, the one with the red, the orange tip. So this guy. So I've used a lot of those, and I look after them pretty carefully, so they've lasted for a long time. So that's their Kolinsky sable. I also use Da Vinci, and this is not the same Da Vinci, so it's Da Vinci Germany as opposed to.
Well, that's the same thing I do. It's Da Vinci. Yeah, I use a lot of Da Vinci brushes. Yeah.
Yep. I think they're terrific. So I use a lot of those. I use those for travel, so I tend to use the Da Vinci travel brushes. There's beautiful sables for travel. I use a few rosemary travel brushes. So those three are the main ones. So my collection, which is there's the Raphael 803s and Raphael and Da Vinci sables.
Yeah, I've got some brushes here, and I have a huge one in my closet over there.
I was given this one, and it is so big. It's a size 14. I've almost never used it. It's so beautiful, but even when I did a canvas I used it for a canvas that was 6 foot by 6 foot. That's about the only time I've actually used it.
Yeah, I have one. I just didn't know what to use it for. It's huge. Yeah, exactly.
But I like the sables for detail, and I like the squirrels for larger areas, but I really like natural hair. However, I also like a couple of synthetic brushes for specific purposes. So in the US, you can get scrubber brushes. Dick Blick make them, and some of the others make them, and they're a synthetic. You're probably familiar with them. But they come in a range of sizes. I've got a couple here. I get quite a lot from the US. So these sorts of things that are a sort of oval shape. I know you can see them.
Yeah.
I use those for lifting out some things. And then Rosemary & Co. make a series of brushes that are called the Eradicator. And they are a very fine synthetic, very focused tip. And they'd be good. I don't know if you've come across them, but they're fantastic for lifting out veins and very, very fine details. So this is the medium. There's also a small, and I use those a lot for just lifting out those very fine details, just taking out the tip, and they're so focused. They're perfect for the job. So they're a particular, there's a few specialty brushes that I quite like, and those are two of them.
You get those from the UK, don't you?
The Rosemary one's from the UK, yeah.
Yeah.
And the scrubbers I get from the US.
So let me ask you, okay, what color could you not live without? Or what couple colors or something? I'll just try to...
I think the smallest set that I'd be comfortable working with would have buff titanium, ultramarine. I think it would have quinacridone gold. No, I could probably manage with the Hansa Yellow medium and mix up my own. So yeah, Hansa Yellow medium, quinacridone rose, burnt sienna. Because I can still make my Jane's grey. That would be about as small as I'd go down to.
What about a red? What about
quinacridone rose?
quinacridone
Would be the
rose?
red.
Okay.
Because with the yellow I can make all the other reds. I couldn't quite make crimson. I'd be frustrated because I'm a realist. But yeah, I mean it's quite interesting. You get down in sizes, and how small can you go? I get uncomfortable with less than 9.
Yeah.
12 is a struggle. 15 I'm happy. 20 is perfect. I like 20 colour palette is lovely. I can show you. Studio palette is this guy, and he's got 20 colours, and
That's wonderful. It's so clean.
I clean them up after every painting. But,
Well, that is so interesting. And so now you have a book. Do you have a book? I think you do, don't you?
two.
Okay, so tell me about your books and how they can find them.
So one of them is, the first of them was the watercolour mixing charts. So on my website, I have, as you know, hundreds of mixing charts, and I just put them into a book to make them available. It's 100 pages, and it goes through all these mixes. And the way I organised them was I started with the main chart that I went through, methodically mixing this with this, little by little, and then doing it with more water, and then doing it with more water. So you really see kind of everything it can do. But then that takes a lot of time and a lot of space. So then below, I might put, the same blue and look at a different yellow and just show them more quickly. And then there are notes. These were my own charts. I'll show you the book because it's kind of interesting. So this is the original.
Oh, my.
So that's the cover that I painted for it. And these are the original charts. And I just did hundreds of them. I mean, there's all these. So I put them on my website, and then I put them as a book to make them available.
That's amazing. I can't even stay in the lines of those little squares. I don't.
So that's the watercolour mixing charts. So that was literally, I'm self-taught with watercolour, and the way I do it is by exploring and trying things. And so then I put these together and put it together into a book. It has the notes that I made for myself, things I'd written out and so on. It's all handwritten. So I just, scanned them, cleaned them up and put them into a book. It would have been sensible to have added the pigment information, and I'm thinking I'll do that on my website so people can add it themselves if they want to. But, I just made it available. So that was the first.
How can somebody find your book? How do they get a hold of it?
They're self-published, so they're available on blurb.com. And for this month, because I'm doing a joint collaboration with Maria from Art Toolkit, she's doing a little mini pocket palette of my Ultimate Mixing set. I'm doing 15% off. So off this book. So I'll talk about that one now. So it's blurb.com. In the US, just blurb.com. In Australia, it's aublurb.com. And for whatever country you're in, you can just search blurb in your country. And then if you put Jane Blundell in the search button, but the two books will come up, and they're available as hardback or paperback or PDF or ebook. But I've put the 15% off this book in either the paper or the hardback.
And how do they get the discount?
It's just I've dropped the price.
Okay.
So it's just for this whole month. So anyone who, if you ever want the paper book, it's the time to get it. This one was designed very much as a reference. So, I developed this set of 15 colours, and then I wanted to show how to work with them. So I always have my students do a few colour charts, but they don't necessarily want to do this many. And so this goes through and shows how the colours look. So that's the set of them. Actually, you can see those colours a bit more clearly. The beautiful
Nice.
colour down there,
Yeah.
and the buff titanium, and of course Jane's grey. And then it goes through, showing what happens when you water them down, how to use them in a colour wheel, and then it goes through every 2 colour mix. So this is mixing every yellow with every red, including the earth yellows and the earth reds, and then every yellow with every blue. And so you can really see all the sorts of colours you can make. So I did all the 2 colour mixes, and then I went on and did all the a whole lot of 3 colour mixes as well. So it just sort of shows what you can do with them. At the bottom I've put notes on what this might be useful for, or this mix will make it black if you really work hard at it, or it could be good for skin tones. And then I've gone through the 3 colour mixes, so looking at three colours and showing this one mixed with the other 2 and this one with the other 2, and showing the different way that works. And so it's just a crazy, that's the index. It's just a whole lot of information on colour. So if you have that set, this shows you everything it will do. I've forgotten, I did actually make a note of how many mixes were in it, and it was thousands.
Well, I'm impressed. I mean, that is something I just couldn't sit down and do. And it's just amazing.
It's 6 months to actually do all of the charts, which I'll show you, because it was this one. So these are the actual charts that I did.
Wow. They're beautiful.
So I just went through, very methodically, and then I'd think, okay, now I need to do this, and then, but then I need to add that, and I just built it up. But it's very compact, and so there's not a lot of explanation, and I've put, as much as I can on each page with little writing, just to try and have it, not too expensive. But anyway, it's a lot of my students will write on it and add their own notes and all those sorts of things, which is great. But yeah, so that's the second book.
I'm going to go ahead and put that in the show notes. That's going to be my intention too. So I'm going to go over this, and so students will be able to find it there. They also asked me if you had another suggestion of a different book. I don't think you need another book after you've got your book.
The other one I'm working on, and it's a bit of a slow process, is called Working with Triads. And it literally goes through 26 triads just using that same set, and then a few others as well, showing examples. And I have a lot of fun with that one. I'll show you that one too, because I love working with my students to make them realise how much you can do with very little. So this is the sort of thing that'll be in it. So this shows just 3 colours and a painting done with the 3 colours, and then those are all mixes just with the 3 colours.
That is fantastic. How many colors were in that?
I think we're going to turn this into a video podcast.
So yes, this is what I call a basic primary palette. It's ultramarine, it's Hansa yellow medium, and it's quinacridone rose. So that's in Daniel Smith. In Winsor Newton, it would be permanent rose, Windsor yellow, and French ultramarine.
And do you think you're going to have that available?
It's in the pipeline.
Yeah.
I want to finish doing the videos for my online lessons, and then I'll get back to work on this. I've got lots of it done, but it's very comprehensive. The other ones I'm planning to do are a sketching book, and then the other one is it's kind of just goes through it's almost like a retrospective of 40 years of painting. So I'll end up with 5 of them, but this one's going to be pretty complex. So here's my favourite triad. So there it is. That's the Earth Triad, and that's the yellow, the red, and the blue. Just that goethite, Indian red, and cerulean chromium. And so then that painting is done just in those, and it gives just gives a beautiful harmony working with a very limited palette.
I mean, everything you do here is gorgeous. It's going to be beautiful, and everybody should have one of those.
That's my Aussie Triad. So this is wonderful colours for Australia. We have all these gum nuts and things. So once again, there's 3 colours. It's quinacridone gold, ultramarine, and Pyrrol crimson, which is the same as Windsor red deep. And then all of these are made with just those colours. So it's going through, and there's a whole lot of others as well. I mean, this is just some of it. So that's made with just 3 colours. Over the back here.
So let me ask you, you're also teaching online, right? Or have you developed are you already active with that? Or
I teach online, but I do it at the moment by email. And so I have all the lessons as a PDF file that I send to my students. But I'm in the process now of creating videos and putting it onto a website so that it will be I've described everything carefully, but obviously a video is just so much easier. So that's just at the beginning of that process. So then it's, because I have so many students, it's actually quite difficult to do it when I'm traveling.
Right.
So it needs to be something that's just,
I couldn't do it while I was traveling. That's why I have one workshop that I'm traveling to this year. I have one next year. Usually I would be gone for about 5 months a year. And it's like putting the brakes and saying no to so many things was so hard for me, but I couldn't get anything done.
So it's just fascinating, and by working through these sorts of things, people realise that with understanding the colours. I mean, one of the points I make that's actually really important is with something like this. Looking at, so this is here run is one with 3 cool colours, but when you have something like this, you're working with the 3. But one of the things that I always emphasise is that means you can add others. So if you're working with these 3 and you happen to have quinacridone magenta, you can make it, so you could add it, if that saves you some time. If you have dioxazine violet, since you can make it, you can add it. The same with here, you could add phthalo green. You could even add a warm yellow. So since you can make those colours, with the 3, why not add, and you can also make these earth colours, so you could add those as well. So it's understanding colour harmony. By starting with a wheel and creating it, you can then add as many as you want for convenience. You don't have to just paint with 3. And I think that's something that people don't necessarily realise. This helps you to know which colours you can add. And if you have a look at one like, where is he?
I don't think there is anybody better with color than you are. You're the queen. You are the queen of color.
This one's a funny one because it doesn't make purple. Right? I call it the no purple triad because it doesn't make purple. It makes, other colours, but not purple. And so in this case, if you added a purple, it would look really wrong. And so it's just thinking through what you can do. And there are some where if you added, with this one, if you were to add phthalo blue or phthalo green, it would look really wrong. It would just stand out. But you can add your duller greens, the rich green golds and those sorts of things. And I just think it helps people to understand what you can do. And you can always add burnt sienna and ultramarine because you can always make them.
Well, it's so fascinating what you do. And one of the questions is, like I was thinking, is about single pigment colors, but you use a wide range of different colors. It's not always.
I do, but they are always colours I can make. So in my palette of 20, it has the basic 15, and then it has some convenience colours. So I'll have a sap green, which is made out of phthalo green and quinacridone gold. They're in my palette. Undersea green is made with ultramarine and quinacridone gold. They're in my palette. Perylene green I can make using phthalo green and pyrrol crimson. So I can make it, so it'll tie in. Jane's grey, it's 2 colours in my palette. And so the convenience ones I add, I could make. If I used imperial purple, it's made out of ultramarine and quinacridone rose. They're in my palette. And so I'm quite conscious always of what the pigments are in the mixes. And if they're going to then just give me convenience, I don't have to keep making that colour, well, then it's fine. It's still going to have colour harmony, which is what I'm interested in.
So don't use indigo or anything because you can make it.
If I want indigo, I'll make it. You can make the most beautiful indigo using phthalo blue and a touch of the warm red, the Pyrrol Scarlet. Will make a beautiful indigo. Indigo is another one that always has black in it. So I don't use it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
always.
I liked the Winsor Newton indigo, but if you have just one wash of that on there, then you can't. You have to build up your layers on that. So anyway, that's a whole nother conversation.
But the nice thing is, because these books, I mean, if they are interested, I'm only doing this special for April, and I've never done it before. So it's just a one-off, and it's 15% off, which really helps. So it's a good thing if they're just aware. I mean, no one has to buy them. But the other thing is to show you this little palette that Maria is doing. So this is the little art toolkit. So, I mean, your students are going to be working large, so it's not necessarily something that they're going to want. But for those who do, this tiny, tiny palette, which is the size of a credit card holder, ultimate mixing set, and they're these tiny little metal pans that are held in with a magnet. And so at the moment, this is what she's put together as a combined thing. And so that's the ultimate mixing palette with the art toolkit. And she's selling those for $74.
Who is the art toolkit?
Oh, her name is Maria, and her website is expeditionaryart.com. And she's a lovely lady in Seattle. So we've been chatting online for years, and we met in 2015, I think it was. And we've met up a couple of times and sketched together, and we're often talking tools and equipment and so on. So this is designed to be portable, and she also does a kit that it will go into. So she's had it made in Seattle, and it will hold a couple of these and a sketchbook and all sorts of things. I don't think I've got one lying around up here, but I can.
Is that through Daniel Smith?
She's using Daniel Smith paints, but no, it's not through Daniel Smith. This is something that she's wanted to do for a while, and now that Jane's Grey is available as a tube, she's done it. So she's done these kits, and they're just a limited number.
Love it. I love that set. It looks gorgeous, and it'd be so fun to travel with that.
Oh, it's beautiful. So there's that, and there's that. And so, and both of them, the book just gives you every information on how to mix them. So, yeah, a couple of cute ways of setting them up.
Well, people would be, whenever I am more intuitive when I paint, I don't really think about it. So your approach is so different than mine. And so many people they've asked me questions that I can't answer the way that you are so in depth with all that color. Like I said, you're the queen. All right, Jane. Thank you so much for joining me. And it was an absolute pleasure. And I hope to talk to you before you go to Greece. That sounds like a really exciting time. And just stay in touch.
Lovely. Well, lovely to meet you, Megan.
Thank you. Take care.
Now that concludes today's episode. And if you're interested in finding out more about Jane, go to janeblundellart.com. And there you can find direct links to her blog. And if you'd like to know more about the colors with Daniel Smith and the special Jane's Grey, go to danielsmith.com or visit her website. I'll also go ahead and post some of these links in the show notes. So until next time, have fun and happy painting.